And we are back. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Derek and Cody, back for another episode, guys. And hey, we lied to you. We have one more topic before we dive into the individual players. This was a topic, Derek, I know that I kind of proposed here on Sunday. So this video will be coming out on Monday. And who knows, maybe we'll talk about a free agent or two on Monday evening. We'll see about that. But regardless, this is the video we're going to do before we dive into the individual players. We're going to rank the tiers, Derek, the three tiers we have for the Colts free agents. Like you said, I think there's 16 guys in total. So we're going to rank them in three different tiers. First, lowest tier, second, mid tier, and then the top tier, the most important players for the Indianapolis Colts to potentially re-sign. And so with that being said, Derek, let's start with the least amount, because I think this is obviously the least we will talk about any of these players. So who are some of those players in your mind, Derek, that kind of fit this least amount of importance to re-sign for the Colts?
Yeah, I mean, you and I kind of brought it up, and we will have probably like 10 different players here on this. Not saying that all of these certain players we wouldn't bring back, but all guys that definitely you could give a second look to. I think first couple of them are Danny Pinter. You talk about Henry Black. You talk about Jack Anderson, Juwan Winfrey, Jannard Avery. Talk about Jake Martin, Isaiah McKenzie, Taven Bryan. The guys like that, we have that sort of situation where, any of those guys, depending on price, depending on a few other things, Indy might have that opportunity to bring some of these guys back, and some of these guys might end up staying on your practice squad throughout the year. But in regards to people who are, interchangeable, and we might see a lot of these names here and there, and then might end up going with some of those, that will probably be those guys that, will probably go in and out of the squad, and then we may see some different names replacing them.
Yeah. Yeah, and Danny Pinter's the only one that I'm kind of like, okay, I know he didn't play this last year because of the injury, but I mean, he's a guy that, you could potentially like argue could be a middle tier, but again, you saw what Wesley French gave you. You've seen a few of these other depth guys. Again, we wouldn't be opposed to the Colts bringing Danny Pinter back, but I think you can easily, Derek, find a player of Danny Pinter's caliber that can play kind of that backup center / guard if need be in a pinch. And so I think when you look at that, you're kind of like, okay, like he might be a player that you like. It's like you can get by with, replacing him with a different player. And so with all these guys, you'll notice these guys are pretty easily replaceable for the most part. And some of these guys might be back on kind of, we've seen different guys on sort of lower, kind of contracts and, might be, practice squad type of guys. Those are the type of players that we're generally talking about here when it comes to the low tier. But Derek, the mid tier is where things get a little bit more interesting because we have a decent amount of players here of note here for the Colts. If you follow the Colts, you'll know, I think pretty much every single one of these players to some degree. Who are those players that you have right now on the mid tier in terms of importance for the Colts to re-sign?
Yeah, so the four players that are mid-tier, guys that Colts should definitely consider bringing back heavily. There may be some things that might need to be restructured when it comes to contracts or a couple other things. Nevertheless, those four players are Zach Moss, Rigoberto Sanchez, Gardner Minshew, and Tyquan Lewis. Now, Zach Moss, for obvious reasons, Cody, Zach Moss, a great player for Indianapolis this year. He was the Indianapolis Colts offense for a good chunk of the start of the year when Anthony Richardson went down. You have the question of whether or not you think Zach Moss is going to garner a lot of money from some other team this year, and you wonder if that's going to be worth the investment making. So that will be something to monitor throughout the offseason. Rigoberto Sanchez, again, he's been the homegrown guy. He's been here for a while. It'll truly just depend on what the contract is, but I highly doubt that there's any concerns with that. Tyquan Lewis, again, probably the same thing. Tyquan Lewis had one of his first years this year where he actually played and didn't really miss many games and, actually was a somewhat decent role player this year for Indianapolis. So that's just going to, again, be one of those things that it really all depends on the contract. And of course, what you're getting with Tyquan Lewis. You get a guy that can give you 4, 5, 6 sacks a season if he gets enough snaps. And that's a mid-tier kind of guy for me when it comes to the depth signing. And then the Gardner Minshew thing, that is definitely going to be the big topic is, are the Colts going to re-sign Gardner Minshew? And a lot of it is just going to come down to, does Gardner Minshew think he has a shot of, starting somewhere else, or feel like he has another opportunity somewhere to be a part of a different organization that maybe gives him that opportunity going forward? Because maybe the Colts decide, maybe they want to go a different direction with their backup quarterback route, because you certainly can find a different quarterback option for less money than what you're probably going to have to pay Minshew. So those are the 4 guys that I put here at the mid-tier spot.
Sure. Yeah, and again, a couple of these guys, I think you can argue a little bit more for, potentially bringing them back. I think the 2 guys that you could really argue for, Derek, that you would say absolutely. You could really make an argument for any of these guys, but I think in my mind, Rigoberto Sanchez looks really, really good at the end of the season. Coming off that torn Achilles, that's a big injury, for a punter and for anybody really, but especially if that's how you're, using that lower part of your body for your entire, position. And so I think he's a guy that you say, homegrown guy, like you mentioned, you bring him back. And then you can, it's really that debate between Moss and Minshew because, on one hand, you see what Zach Moss did with Jonathan Taylor, and you're like, wow, like you get that combination. That's such a lethal combination. Who in the world can you stop? Who could stop these 2 guys working together? And then the Gardner Minshew, the insurance policy. But again, Derek, with the latter 2, with Moss and Minshew, it does come down to price for me. Because if Minshew is wanting starter money and a starter opportunity, obviously you're not going to hold him back and re-sign him because Anthony Richardson's your guy. But on the other hand, if he does feel content to stay here, you need a quarterback like Gardner Minshew, because if Anthony Richardson, God forbid, something else happens, then you're stuck in the same situation. But again, I understand what you're saying with, maybe you take a chance on more of an unknown quarterback, but again, maybe some of the limitations aren't there that you have with Gardner Minshew, where you kind of know what you're getting. But also, it does open up the opportunity for him to be a lot worse than Gardner Minshew. The ceiling's potentially higher, but the floor is potentially a lot lower too. So it's kind of that weighing that risk a little bit when it comes to that. So there's all different debates. And then Tyquan Lewis, I think he's just been such a solid player when he's been healthy. And he did prove that he can be healthy this year. So I think there is an argument for all these guys, although, if you really look at it and you say if you lose any of these guys, it's obviously a bummer. You want to keep them all. But you look at it and you say, hey, we can replace these guys with certain other assets if we need to do that. And so I think that's the reason why they just don't make the top tier, because these guys aren't quite irreplaceable like the next 4 guys or so that we're going to talk about at the top tier. So with that being said, Derek, let's move to the top tier guys. Should surprise absolutely nobody here with our 4 picks for the top 4 guys for the Indianapolis Colts. Why don't you let everybody know the top 4 guys the Colts must re-sign?
Yeah, you're right. These guys, none of these guys are irreplaceable, but when it comes to it, they are the top of the team of what they do. And when they miss games, it's clear what their impact is on their respective positions, much more than the other guys. Grover Stewart being the first one. Again, the numbers speak for themselves, Cody. The Colts give up an average of 40 to 45 more yards per game rushing the football when Grover's not in the lineup. So, Grover Stewart is maybe the best run-stopping defensive tackle in the entire NFL. It's kind of hard to replace something like that. Totally wish that you could get better sack production out of the guy, but it's kind of what you have DeForest Buckner there for. Grover Stewart is just that guy in the middle that bodies people and just is a big plug in the middle. Kenny Moore, again, your secondary is just so young. It's still learning and it's still got all these new things. Kenny Moore's just that veteran in the locker room, and he is just that guy that has always been consistent. 2022, the only year that Kenny Moore hasn't played at a Pro Bowl / All Pro level. This year, he even did the same exact thing. So, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if you're looking at, even if you're the Colts and you address the cornerback room, there still should be no doubt that you should be trying to get Kenny Moore back into this group for how young and inexperienced you are at it. Julian Blackmon for the same reason. I mean, again, Blackmon, I don't think is going to get top tier. I don't think he's going to get top tier money just because of, the position and the amount of time that he has missed. But again, like we said with Kenny Moore, we saw in the last couple games when he missed, especially in that Texans game, they got beat down the field multiple times, Cody, because Julian Blackmon was missed. So, I mean, it definitely is a big thing. And even in the Raiders game, the amount of throws that were 15, 20, 25 yards down the field that were missed on that right side because Nick Cross just wasn't quite there in time. Got to wonder if Julian Blackmon was there, if things would have been a little different, so that, and Julian Blackmon, who was having statistically the best year of his entire young career so far. So again, the top of what he does on the team right now. And Pittman is obviously the one that everyone's going to mention because, like you said, Pittman is the best in this group right now. He is the second best offensive weapon that you have on this team besides Jonathan Taylor. And you could honestly argue that he's more important than Jonathan Taylor right now because, I mean, without Pittman, our offensive pass game is just non-existent. So, I mean, even with Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, who we both believe that with Anthony Richardson could do some great things, it still is at a point where Pittman is just the guy. He's the guy that always is there. He's reliable and he makes the right plays. So, I mean, when it comes to these four guys, they are the best on the team at what they do. And it's no doubt that Indy should be going balls to the wall to try and make sure all these guys come back.
I think if you were making an indispensable list, Derek, and you looked at this last year, I think you could argue, and you could probably make a really strong argument that all four of these players deserve some spot on that list. I really do believe that because, like you mentioned, how valuable they were and how important they were and how much of a drop-off you saw when they weren't in the lineup. I mean, that is just so crazy how every single guy, how critically important they are and how much it means. And that's why we've said, like, this is such a lucrative free agent list here for the Colts because you've got four key contributors here, four guys that are the best in the position group here. So definitely need to re-sign these guys. Do whatever you need to bring these guys back because they've shown when they're not in the lineup, your team definitely suffers. And so those guys definitely deserve that kind of money. And so it's going to be interesting to see, do the Colts bring these guys back? I do think, I have a strong feeling that they try to get all four back, and I think they will. But the other kind of couple mid-tier guys and some low-tier guys, I'm not entirely sure. But I think you prioritize the top-tier guys, then you see what happens with those mid-tier guys, and then you keep moving forward and maybe give some chances to those smaller tier guys. Again, we'll see on that. But, yeah, guys, that'll do it for this one. Let us know your thoughts on the Indianapolis Colts free agents, on the different tiers. Is there a player you would have put in a different tier, whether higher or lower? Which players do you want the Colts to absolutely re-sign? Which players are you like, no, not really a priority for me? Or which guys could you go either way? Let us know all those things in the comments below. But like I said, guys, we are going to be coming out with individual player profiles for each of the Indianapolis Colts main free agents. I don't know if we're going to get to every single free agent, but we're going to talk a lot about some of the notable guys here this next week. So definitely be on the lookout this week for those videos because we're going to dive into depth and talk about these players a little bit more in detail for some of you people who maybe want a little bit more of an overview on some of these guys and why the Colts should or should not consider bringing them back. So, guys, be sure to check that out. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to smash that like button, turn on subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all of that good stuff. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.